Hey guys, uh, boy, I'm back. I got started on the Exodus 22 stream, and my daughter came in and asked me to snuggle, and next thing you know, I'm seeing a flashlight outside through my window, which I wasn't expecting. Turns out that was another kid outside, so all is well. It was funny because the timing of that was as I was talking about like home invasions and stuff. Um, so I'm going to end up for continuity's sake, redoing the whole thing. So bear with me. If you got started the last time, I'm going to back up a little bit here. So maybe if you don't want to go through that live, maybe tune in later once this is not live. So again, for anyone who's tuning in for the first time in this series, what I'm doing with this series is I'm countering the idea in Christianity that the law is Yahweh's commandments, His law is Torah is too hard to keep. We just can't keep it. It's impossible for anyone to keep it. So Jesus died and thus freed us from the law. Okay, He kept the law perfectly, so we don't have to. That's the notion that I'm countering with this series. Basically, I'm looking at each commandment, starting at Mount Sinai, so Exodus chapter 20, and I'm going through Deuteronomy eventually, all of them. And I'm going to look and see, can we, in America 2020, keep this commandment or not? Is it possible? I'm going to try not to get too much into the theology of it, but I am just going to look at nuts and bolts. Is it possible? Just on a practical level, can it be done? Okay? So I hope you stay with me as I go through this. Again, I'm sorry for jumping back in and starting over, but that's life sometimes, I guess. So here we go. Exodus chapter 22. If a man steals an ox or a sheep and slaughters it or sells it, he shall pay 5 oxen for the ox and 4 sheep for the sheep. So this is a commandment that I think we can keep. If you steal an ox or a sheep, you can pay it back. You can make the restitution. Now, can you pay that up right away? Maybe you don't have that in your possessions. Maybe you don't have the number of oxen you need or the sheep. But in theory, you could find some way to obtain that in order to make the payment back. So this is one that can be done. Okay. If the thief is caught while breaking in and is struck so that he dies, there will be no blood guiltiness on his account. But if the sun has risen on him, there will be blood guiltiness on his account. So, if you're sleeping at night, somebody breaks into your house and rattles you, startles you from your sleep, and in all that chaos, the darkness and everything, you perceive a danger and you shoot them and kill them or whatever, and they die. Okay? There's no blood guiltiness for your account, and the way I interpret that is that whenever you kill somebody, according to the Torah, there is an avenger of blood. Somebody has a legal right to come after you. And depending on the circumstances, you either have it coming and it happens, or you could flee to one of the cities of refuge. We'll get into that more in detail as we go through this. But in my interpretation, when there's no blood guiltiness, that doesn't apply. There is no avenger of blood that has any legal right to come and take you. Okay? Now, if it's done in the daylight, then yes, if you kill that person, the blood guiltiness does kick in. And I reason that that's because, at night you can't see clearly. What do they have in their hand? Is it a gun? What is it? So you have to assume the worst in order to protect yourself and your family. In the daylight, you can clearly see, hopefully, what your intruder has. And so you have more of an expectation to make the right choice. And if they're unarmed, if they're presumably not a threat to life and limb, then you don't use lethal force, okay? So I think that that's the distinction here. Now then it talks about, then it talks about restitution. He shall surely make restitution. If he owns nothing, then he's sold for his theft. And then if what he stole is found alive, then he pays it double, okay? Now I'm presuming the language here is kind of weird to me, because it's talking about if you kill somebody breaking into your house, and then it's talking about them making restitution. Well, you can't make restitution if you're dead. So I'm thinking that it kind of shifts gears here and talks about if the intruder, doesn't die, if you don't kill them, then they just make restitution, okay? So if you break into someone's house and they don't kill you, you can make restitution. So this is a commandment that you can keep, okay? Hopefully you're not breaking into people's houses, but if you do, you can keep this commandment. All right, verse 5. If a man lets a field or vineyard be grazed bare and lets his animal loose so that it grazes in another man's field, he shall make restitution from the best of his own field and the best of his own vineyard. Now, that's a pretty easy to understand, self-explanatory commandment, and I do think it is one that can be kept. Okay? Verse 6, if a fire breaks out and spreads to thorn bushes, so that stacked grain or the standing grain or the field itself is consumed, he who started the fire shall surely make restitution. Can that commandment be kept? I think so. Now, we've got some of these fires, like the ones in California, where you find out later that like tens of thousands of acres were started by one idiot out in the forest playing around, dropping a cigarette or just being an idiot and setting off fireworks or whatever. I don't see how a person can make restitution for that much damage, but there will be some kind of punishment levied by the U.S. penal system, so jail time, something like that. I mean, there's got to be some kind of punishment. But bottom line, you can make some kind of restitution if you cause a fire that causes damage like that. Okay, so yes, this commandment, in my opinion, can be kept. All right, verse 7, if a man gives his neighbor money or goods to keep for him, and it's stolen from the man's house, if the thief is caught, he shall pay double, the thief. Now, can that be kept? Yes. If the thief is not caught, then the owner of the house shall appear before the judges to determine whether he laid his hands on his neighbor's property. For every breach of trust, whether it is for ox, for donkey, for sheep, for clothing, or any lost thing about which one says, "This is it," the case of both parties shall come before the judges. He whom the judges condemn shall pay double to his neighbor. Now, everything I just read there is pretty self-explanatory. However, I don't think that we can keep this properly. And this one's kind of more nuanced, because you're supposed to go to the judges in this case. The judges being those 70 judges that were instituted by Moses. We don't have those today. Now, the Jews over in Israel have their Sanhedrin. In my opinion, that's not a valid judicial system. To me, I don't count those, okay? So we don't have a legitimate system of judges that judges by the Torah. We just don't. So taking it to the judges and stuff, you can't do. Okay, so anything like that is going to be subject to the United States legal system, just like most of this other stuff. Okay, so but I do think that we can use the principles of this, and I do think that it's the principles of it that we can do, even though technically we can't take it to the biblical judicial system. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Verse 10, if a man gives his neighbor a donkey, an ox, a sheep, or any animal to keep for him, and it dies or is hurt or is driven away while no one is looking, an oath before Yahweh shall be made by the two of them that he has not laid hands on his neighbor's property, and its owner shall accept it, and he shall not make restitution. Everything there can be done. Now, I know I said I wasn't going to go theological, but there is the one case, and this is, I'll let you interpret this, but there is the one case in the New Testament where Yahshua Jesus said not to swear, okay? Now, is that talking about making oaths at all? Some people say yes. Some people say you can't make any oaths. Some people say you can't make vows, but yet we all do it when we get married. So I'll leave that part of it up for interpretation, but in theory, this can be done. Okay? Verse 12, but if it is actually stolen from him, he shall make restitution to its owner. If it is all torn to pieces, let him bring it as evidence. He shall not make restitution for what has been torn to pieces. No mention of the judges there, so in my opinion, all of that can be done. If a man borrows anything from his neighbor and it is injured or dies while its owner is not with it, he shall make full restitution. If its owner is with it, he shall not make restitution. If it is hired, it came for its hire. Again, no mention of the biblical judicial system, so this one can be done. Okay? So far, the vast majority of the commandments that we've read can be done, and the only ones that really can't are the penal stuff, the penalties, the death penalty stuff, and things like that. We can't really do that part of the commandments. But the base, the foundational parts of those commandments, almost all of them, we can keep so far in 2020 America. Okay, so just kind of a recap. We discussed that in Exodus 20 and Exodus 21. Most of those we can do so far. We'll get into some later where we can't, or at least on an individual basis. But for so far, so good. We're doing good here. We can do this, guys. We got it. All right. Okay. Where do we go? Verse 16. If a man seduces a virgin who is not engaged and lies with her, he must pay a dowry for her to be his wife. If her father absolutely refuses to give her to him, he shall pay money equal to the dowry for virgins. Now, this is one of those ones where we look back in time and we say, well, that's a much different culture than we have in America 2020. Okay, but just looking strictly at this commandment, this can be done. It might seem a little weird. It might seem a little ancient, little, archaic, but just looking nuts and bolts technical, yes, it can be done. Okay? You shall not allow a sorceress to live, verse 18. This is one of those ones I mentioned, the penalties. Yes, technically this one can be done. If you encounter a witch, a sorceress, you can kill that person. What's going to happen if you do? You're going to be in jail yourself as a murderer. Okay, so it's one that on at face value can be done, but not necessarily in 2020 America. Okay, whoever lies with an animal shall surely be put to death. Same thing, death penalty. We can't really do it. Okay. Verse 20, he who sacrifices to any god other than to Yahweh alone shall be utterly destroyed. Same thing there. Okay? But to look at the underlying, offenses here, you don't have to be a sorceress or a sorcerer. You don't have to have relations with animals. You don't have to sacrifice to gods other than Yahweh. Okay? So if you don't do these things, then nobody has to look at the penal aspect of it. So, that's one of those things to where part of the commandment you can do if you look at it kind of on an inverse kind of way. Okay, so verse 21, you shall not wrong a stranger or oppress him, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. You shall not afflict any widow or orphan. If you afflict him at all, and if he does cry out to me, I will surely hear his cry. And my anger will be kindled, and I will kill you with the sword, and your wives shall become widows, and your children fatherless. Now, do you have to wrong a stranger? Do you have to afflict widows? No. So this is a commandment that you can keep. You don't have to do this kind of stuff. Okay. And if you do, the language that he uses as far as the penalty is more akin to the language that he uses when he's punishing the group collectively. So when he talks about bringing the sword on the land, things like that, that's language that he uses more for the group, not specific individual people. So to me, it's unclear if he's talking about the you shall not, if that's collectively to the group shall not, I mean, in our system here in America, our government does oppress people. It does oppress widows. I mean, it does oppress strangers. I mean, it happens. But is this commandment talking about that, or is it talking about individual? I don't know. But either way, just don't mess with people, right? Be kind. We can do that. Verse 25, if you lend money to my people, to the poor among you, you are not to act as a creditor to him. You shall not charge him interest. Okay, so if you loan money to one of your countrymen, can you go without charging them interest? Yes, you can. You don't have to charge them interest, so we can keep this one. Verse 26, if you ever take your neighbor's cloak as a pledge, you are to return it to him before the sun sets, for that is his only covering. It is his cloak for his body. What else shall he sleep in? And it shall come about that when he cries out to me, I will hear him, for I am gracious. Now this is one of those ones that's very specific, okay? We can interpret the principle, but it's so specific that I think it's only talking about cloaks, okay? So, does your neighbor have a cloak to even take as a pledge to begin with? Probably not. Most people don't have cloaks. If your neighbor did have a cloak, and they gave it to you as a pledge, then you could fulfill this commandment and give it back to him before the sun goes down. But the odds of that happening are not likely. But it is possible to keep this commandment if you're ever in a situation where you can actually do this and you have somebody that has a cloak, okay? Okay, verse 28, you shall not curse God nor curse a ruler of your people. Okay, do you have to curse God? Do you have to curse Yahweh? No, nobody's going to make you, so you can keep that part of the commandment. Do you have to curse the ruler of your people? No. So you can keep that commandment as well. And some people will interpret that as saying you can't speak any ill of the rulers. Okay? So I remember when Obama was around, I couldn't stand the guy. And I had people literally scold me. What are you doing? And they will quote this commandment. You're not supposed to curse a ruler of your people. Well, I never cursed Obama. Not in the sense of cursing, I had a healthy criticism for his policies and his demeanor, but I never cursed the man. Okay? Now, on the other hand, with Trump, not to make this political, but we have witches, witch covens, and things that are actually cursing Trump. So, yes, when you go to do that, you are violating this commandment. But if you're watching this video, chances are you don't roll that way. So you could probably keep this, okay? Verse 29, you shall not delay the offering from your harvest and your vintage. The firstborn of your sons you shall give to me. You shall do the same with your oxen and with your sheep. It shall be with its mother 7 days, and on the 8th day you shall give it to me. Now this one is tricky because the principle, it's the principle of offering the best, the first fruits, right? We really can't do it, and he doesn't give the details on how to go about this, but he does later. The whole redemption process for a firstborn, for animals, things like this, that all involves going to the temple. It involves interacting with the tabernacle or the temple. So we really can't keep this in modern America. We just can't, because there's nowhere to take your first fruit. How do you give your firstborn to Yahweh? I mean, you have I think it's the half shekel that comes out later that you pay to the temple, basically in exchange to keep your son, okay, or your firstborn. So we can't do that now. So this is a commandment that I don't think we can keep. Verse 31, you shall be holy to me, therefore you shall not eat any flesh torn to pieces in the field. You shall throw it to the dogs. Now, if you are, you find roadkill or whatever, and it's torn to pieces, you don't have to eat it. If you're out hunting and you come across a deer, that a bear had gotten to first, but there's some meat left on the bones, you don't have to eat that meat. So this is a commandment that we can keep, okay? So that's the end of chapter 22. We had a few there that, we can't keep, in my opinion, or at least partly we can't keep them, but generally we're still on track to where most of the commandments that we've read so far, starting in Exodus 20, we can keep at least in some way, okay? We haven't gotten into anything just on a fundamental level that's just impossible for anyone watching this to keep, okay? So we will encounter those later, but for now, we're not there yet. So I hope that this is something, this series, if you've been watching it, is something that's good, that's beneficial. I plan to keep this going through Deuteronomy, so this is going to be a while, but I'm trying to keep them up every day. And yeah, I mentioned this when I first started, but I didn't say it when I restarted. I do have OBS software now, so I am planning on getting that up and running where I can stream, through the laptop and not use the phone. I have a better I have an actual legit webcam that's got good video and stuff. So if I can get that to where it doesn't lag, then that will be up and running, and I can do that here and on Facebook and then over on YouTube. And of course, as always with this series, this stream I will put over on YouTube. I have a playlist on my YouTube channel called The Commandments, where you can go and watch these at your leisure if you want to. But that's it for tonight. So far so good. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope everyone has an awesome rest of the week. Yahweh bless.